Welcome to Dialing In Your Coffee Business, where we help cafe and roastery owners build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including them. I'm Michael Ryan. I'm a certified business coach and consultant that helps cafe and roastery owners build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including them. On today's episode, I'm joined by Maxwell Mooney, and we are discussing marketing. We're continuing to use the analogy of your coffee business is like an airplane in hopes of helping it become clear that marketing is a necessity. It is not a nicety. If you think about your business like an airplane, how many airplanes have you been on that have no engines? In fact, an airplane with no engines is not an airplane. It's a glider, and it is subject to the whims of the wind and the environment. If you want to get on board a safe airplane that takes great care of people, including the pilots, you need one with at least one engine, and that engine is your marketing department, your marketing efforts. On this episode, we talk about why you need to consider marketing a necessity, what types of marketing you might engage in, from word of mouth marketing to organic marketing. We define what that actually means. There's a lot of misunderstanding around what organic marketing actually means. And of course, paid marketing efforts, including advertisements. We also discuss what kind of return on investment you should be expecting, emphasizing the fact that marketing is an investment and you should expect a return on the dollars that go into marketing. Our hopes in this episode is to help you reframe marketing as something that is helpful and necessary if your goal is to take great care of people. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that this podcast is an extension of our coaching and consulting. It's a part of our effort to make all of the tools necessary to build a healthy coffee business zero cost to everyone. In keeping with that theme, I'd like to thank one of today's sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by our How to Grow a Cafe online course. If your coffee shop is already open, then you've learned that turning a profit, taking a paycheck, and taking a day off is a lot trickier than you might have expected. Or maybe you were told that none of those things would ever happen, so don't even try. Either way, this course is for you. No matter where you're at in the process, this course will remind you that it's possible to turn a profit, to take a paycheck, and to even take a day off. And more than that, this course will show you how. Owners often ask me if they're still going to get something out of this course because they've already been open for 5, 10, 15 plus years. And my answer is always the same. Experience does not equal expertise. Just because you've been open for a long time does not mean you've built the healthiest coffee business you could be building, because experience is not the same as expertise. Everyone who has taken this course has learned at least one thing that has either saved them or made them thousands and thousands of dollars. You can access this course and all of our others at threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com/courses. And as a listener of the podcast, you get a discount on all of our on-demand courses. Just enter the code podcast100, all caps, and you'll get $100 off any of our online on-demand courses. That's threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com/courses and enter the code podcast100, all caps, to get $100 off any of our on-demand courses. And now my conversation with Maxwell Mooney. Welcome back, everybody. I am super excited to talk with Maxwell today about marketing. This may not seem like a natural next episode in the series because our last episode was talking about leadership. But one of the things that I said in that explains why I think this is actually a natural next topic of conversation. I think it's really helpful in some senses to think of the communication of what you guys are, what your coffee business is all about. Communication of that to your staff is your mission, your vision, your values, and your communication of that to your customers or potential customers is your marketing. So we're going to talk about marketing today. Specifically, I want to look at kind of 3 dimensions of it. And especially create lots of space for Maxwell to share his thoughts. The 3 dimensions of marketing that I'm super excited. Why do you shake your head?
Why does anybody want to know my thoughts? Why is anyone listening to this?
Why is anyone even listening?
First mistake, anyway.
The 3 dimensions I want to look at marketing through, or the 3 lenses I want to look at marketing through are word of mouth marketing, because that's still marketing. And then organic marketing. And by organic, we mean specifically non-paid intentional efforts. We'll talk about that in more in a second. And then I do want to talk about paid for a second, because as people who have experienced and experimented with all 3 types, I think it's really helpful to talk about the pros and the cons of relying on word of word of mouth campaign, relying on organic strategies that are not paid, and then creating some space in our mental model for something that where we spend a few dollars, a few $100s maybe. But before we dive into the topic of marketing, I do think the best way to understand what marketing is, what it's for, why it's necessary, is again this analogy of a business like an airplane. Imagine an airplane with no engines. It's just not going anywhere. And I feel like a lot of people have a resistance to marketing and a resistance to seeing it as necessary. And I would put myself in this category for a long time. And ultimately, it's one of the things that held me back and stopped me from helping more people was a resistance to just the idea of marketing. So before we dive in, Maxwell, why do you think people have such strong emotional objections to just marketing in general, word of mouth, organic or paid? They really want there to be a version where they don't have to do any of this stuff.
Totally. I think there are myriad reasons why. I think a lot of it's because culture doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? And nobody comes to this negative view of marketing without lots of bad examples of marketing.
Yep.
It's like you can, for example, like watch the TV show Mad Men, and they're finding every sort of way to spin every sort of product, and it just feels like marketing therefore is just lying to people to get them to buy whatever crap.
Totally.
And I think that a lot of times that kind of thing feels disingenuous to a lot of people, and it feels like they're just pulling the wool over people's eyes.
Yeah, it's manipulative.
Yeah, and I can understand why people feel that way. I've felt that way times as well.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be that way, right?
Yeah.
Like there's this sort of false dichotomy that emerges inside of a lot of people when they think about marketing. Marketing is always like just trying to sell you something, or whatever. And it's like, sure, of course, like the end goal of marketing is to tell you about something. But when your business is oriented around filling a need, you're not actually like selling somebody something that's useless. You're actually like putting it in front of people who have that same need that you can help fix. So I think that's part of the reason why is there's so many negative examples of ways that marketing principles and tactics have been abused by people who are selling, death sticks, to borrow a Star Wars terminology for a cigarette or whatever. It's like maybe that's the thing, John Hamm is selling someone on Lucky Strike cigarettes or something, but it's like at the end of the day, like, it doesn't have to be that way. It can be a genuine reflection of the things that are meaningful to you and you spend a lot of effort and time working on,
Yeah.
So.
I think there's two really powerful things in what you just shared. One is that mission comes before marketing. The need you fill comes before telling people about it. And a lot of what gets, held up as an example of manipulative marketing, or the way we think of marketing in a disparaging sense, is because they're selling cigarettes or they're selling something. They're trying to sell things people don't need. What is the saying? Selling things you don't need to people who don't have the money anyway. Like, so much of it is that. Okay, but we're not playing that game at all. We're opting out. We're saying no. We're not doing that. That's part of the reason why the primary responsibility of a coffee business is to fill a genuine need people have. The other thing that's embedded in what you said is, I do think this is actually really important. We as humans, we are not great at distinguishing between fiction and reality. I can't tell you when marketing and sales come up, I cannot tell you how often the example is a fictional one. I watched Mad Men. I was talking with somebody the other day, and they were quoting lines from the movie The Founder, and then they literally said that stuff, they didn't use that word, actually happened. And I was like, I'm sorry, you just quoted me lines from a movie that starts with the phrase "inspired by a true story," not based on a true story, inspired by. I was like, their emotional resistance to marketing and sales was partially fueled by a fictional story.
It's, Michael, not to interrupt too much, but it's almost like stories are really powerful ways of communicating, and they kind of like work within the human psyche. even
Yeah.
if the story may or may not be real.
Yeah, it's weird. I've
So I
never
can't
heard
imagine
this.
why people would feel
Yeah.
that way.
Never heard anybody say that before.
Definitely
That's
not
weird.
in the last episode
Yeah,
of
definitely
our
not.
podcast that you should definitely not go listen to right
Good.
now,
And we're definitely
because
not going to
we're
also talk
definitely
about story again
no, we're
today.
definitely not like filling needs in a business owner's life with our podcast
Yeah.
or our offerings.
True
Anyway,
story.
sorry,
Yeah,
my
well,
apologies.
actually, that differentiation between fiction and reality is a great example of how powerful story is. I think one of the problems, and people intuitively pick up on this, that power is leveraged by people who want to use it to sell you something that's going to kill you, something that's not actually good for you. Okay, that's happening. That's going to continue to happen. How is it a remedy to that if the people who are genuinely filling a need decide they're just going to sit on their hands and do nothing? What is the saying? Like all it actually takes is for the good people to do nothing. That's all it takes. And when we don't engage in any type of marketing, when we don't embrace things like word of mouth, organic, and even paid strategies, we're essentially we might have a beef with the Lucky Strike cigarettes or the whoever, but we're not solving anything. We're not making anything better by doing nothing.
Yep.
That's just the requisite for those kind of things to flourish and take over. The three main types of marketing that I would love to look at today are word of mouth strategies, organic, and paid. And I think most people, and this is broad brushstrokes, but I think most people don't really understand word of mouth strategies.
Mm-hmm.
And you've said some things to me over the years that really opened my eyes to how powerful they can be, but also how much intentional effort they take.
Totally.
I think people think word of mouth is like magic,
Yeah.
and I don't think that's the case. And I think your experience illustrates this, especially with opening the Everett location of Narrative. Tell folks a little bit about what that looked like and how did you actually gain traction without spending ad dollars, at least not initially.
Yeah. So one thing I try to tell people is like marketing is going to cost you money, whether you spend for ad dollars or not. Like word of mouth marketing is still going to cost you money. It's because at the end of the day, word of mouth marketing is relying on the quality of your product, right? And the quality of your experience that you're offering. And a lot of times, like to be able to do both those things well takes money, right? And so it's like you're going to spend money on marketing, period, because you're just telling the truth about what's happening. Word of mouth involves other people participating with you, people who believe in what you're doing and those sorts of things. But you have to help them believe first, and so it's like there are a lot of different ways that works itself out in reality. you know it's like word of mouth at its most essential form is just like, hey, I had a really good experience at this place, you should go check it out, right? And that's like to us, like I think for most of us that really, especially if we built a business on something that matters to us, like that's what we want. Like we just really want people to like get it and love it as much as we do and tell their friends about it. But you also have to help incentivize people to want to do it, and it's a great example is people would always ask me like, well, how do you get like so many people like sharing about your stuff? It's like, well, I made a space that was really pretty for them to share it in. It's like I put lots of little Instagram bait. I call it Instagram bait. Whenever you like make a pretty spot, with pretty lighting, and it's like built for people to share it with, and you see a lot of people have learned it over the years, and like it'll become less effective as it becomes ubiquitous, because people like realize that it's only about that, or they'll start to feel like it's only about getting them to share stuff. But it's like, how many disco balls do I see with cool buttons in bathrooms now? It's like you walk into a bathroom and press the button that says don't press the button, and then you do it, and then it's a disco party, and they're like, oh, look at this, and it's like that works for a while. But that's a little bit of what it means is, like intentionally designing things in a way that encourage people to check it out. But at the end of the day, the real thing is about the product, you know. So it does cost money, but there are a lot of strategies that you should be using around it. Like one, making a good product, giving a good experience, which includes setting up your space in a way that is shareable, right? And a joy for people to want to share because it made an impact on them. Welcome them in, like teach your crew to treat them with respect and make an experience for them more than just transaction, and then find people who like understand what you're doing and build people like you're essentially trying to create like brand advocates that get what you're doing and they see the need and you filled it for them. And so they're excited to tell other people because they realize that it's a need that could be filled. So I think it's, kind of a mix of all those things.
I love that on so many levels. It's a much more holistic way of looking at it. Again, going back to something we said last time, a lot of folks will see the symptom, but they don't quite connect it back to the cause. So like they see business is slow, but they don't realize it's because they cut corners on a bunch of things that led to a poor quality product. So of course your word of mouth campaign's not taking off because you're delivering a subpar.
Because nobody cares.
Yeah, nobody cares. The other thing I think is so powerful is, again, this idea of a business doing a fantastic job, filling a genuine need. People will talk about that.
Yep.
If and only if you genuinely solve a real need. I heard somebody say once, in a word of mouth marketing campaign, you still have to tell people what to say about you. And the need you fill, telling people you're going to fill it, filling it, telling them you filled it, like that's part of that experience of like, hey, this is what we're all about. And people will grab those and that becomes the word of mouth campaign. But so often it's thought of as magic or intentional, or to borrow from the movie Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. This like, there's nothing you can do to influence it or help it or aid it. It just has to happen. I think that there are things outside our control, but I don't think relinquishing every single thing and treating it all as if it's outside our control, I don't think that's very helpful. Not saying you can and should control 100% of things, but even if it's only 20%, 40, 51%, whatever you think it is, there's some section of it that you can influence, and just focusing on that, whatever it is.
Yeah, to take that Field of Dreams analogy really quickly, let's think about for a moment if someone builds a thing up in the mountains, up a really windy dirt road, how many people can make it to there?
Yeah.
Right? Like, so part of doing the building it is helping build the road for people to get there in the first place and making it manageable, right? And it's like that's part of marketing, is helping people get there. Helping make the product accessible, and not in just a financial way, but just that they know it exists, because otherwise it's not going to solve their problem. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. It reminds me of what Ralph Waldo Emerson said about, and this is a paraphrase, but that idea of like, you build a better thing, people will beat a path to your door, even if you live in the mountains. But how much better if you build a better thing and don't live in the mountains?
Totally. Yeah.
Then, because all things being equal, you can try that approach, but why not do both? Why not build a better thing, fill the need in a better way, and be accessible to people? Again, it's not an either or scenario.
Yeah.
I'd like to take a brief moment and thank another one of today's sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by our How to Grow a Cafe group coaching cohort. This 12-week cohort is led by Maxwell Mooney, and he meets weekly with the group to follow along with the 12 modules in our How to Grow a Cafe online course. But it is much more than that. When you join our group coaching program, you get access to our private owners-only Slack community, you get access to group call recordings, and you get a link to book one-on-one calls with us during your 12-week cohort. Sometimes you just need an outside perspective and a second set of eyes to figure out what the next best step is for your coffee business. You can watch the full trailer for this program at threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com/group-coaching. And be sure to enter the discount code podcast500 to get $500 off your group coaching cohort. That's threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com/group-coaching to watch the full trailer and enter the code podcast500, all caps, to get $500 off your group coaching cohort. Let's talk about organic marketing for a second. And this to me is become kind of a passion project for me, because it is one of the most misunderstood types of marketing there is. When I hear people say organic, and this is in general with coffee businesses in general, when I hear people say organic anything, I don't mean organic certified coffee. I mean like, oh, we just grew organically. What they usually actually mean is haphazardly, slowly, on accident, all these things. But if you think about an organic system, and let's just use the analogy of like planting a garden, does that happen accidentally or does it happen intentionally? Intentionally. Does it happen mysteriously, or are there some set rules? There's definitely set rules. Especially, I like the analogy of a garden because it's an organic system, but it's an organic system that has to feed you, just like your coffee business.
Mm-hmm.
And a cafe and a roastery it can grow organically, but it needs to grow organically in a way that will feed your family and employ you and your staff and all those things. Again, a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people. And we have about 16 acres. We have a couple gardens. We have garden beds and then one out front. But I'm not going to lie, we don't rely on it to feed our family. If we did, I would go about it quite a bit differently than I do. I would be very intentional. I would be very methodical with key things like watering, fertilizing, and or composting type things, like making sure it's placed in a way that gets direct sunlight. So organic, if you look up the definition of organic marketing, it's just any efforts that are not paid efforts. But it is still expensive because it requires time.
Yeah, it's an effort.
It's still an effort cost, yeah. So what kind of things have you seen actually work, Maxwell? It's still in the realm of organic. You already alluded to some of them, but things that actually worked that weren't paying for ads, but they still cost effort dollars, so to speak, or time dollars. What kind of stuff have you seen work for coffee shops? And if you have any examples for coffee roasteries, that's great too. Coffee shops is the one that people most often think of as mysterious. Like there's marketing for coffee shops. That's the witchcraft right there. People view that as something otherworldly, and I just don't think it is helpful to think of it that way.
Yeah, I think one of them is social media is a quick and easy example of where you can choose to spend money on it or not to. For essentially all of Narrative's time, I never spent money on it from the side of Instagram. But that doesn't mean that I didn't spend effort and time doing it. It's like I bought a camera and learned how to take good photos, right? And how to do all that. And that took time, just learning about composition and lighting and, all those kinds of things. And so that's a thing that happens. Also doing things in your community, like serving and being a community volunteer. That's something nobody talks about that, but it's really essential. Like it's really important for how to be a part of a community, It's like, and I hear so many people talk about how community is an important value for them. It's like, so how are you serving your community? And they're like, oh, we're open, and you're like, God, come on, man. Like, what are you actually doing? Like, but I think those are kinds of things that are part of that organic marketing of just like getting out there and meeting people. It has to be intentional, and people have to know who you are, and all those things tie into it. So I think that's a really big one that I think a lot of coffee shops don't think about as marketing, but it is. That's part of it.
I love that. And whether you think of that as part of your word of mouth campaign or if you just think of it as organic marketing, I think so much of it, I understand that business is fundamentally a different entity than a human, like a natural, normal human relationship. But
of course,
just to borrow that framework for a second, so many cafe and roastery owners are like a person who wants to be in a relationship, but they never go out. And I've been that person. And I'll tell you, I had to leave my house to like build relationships. And it's the same with the business. You can't just be open and expect people to magically figure out that you're amazing. Even if you are amazing, it's not enough. You have to put yourself out there, whether that's being involved in the community, whether it's posting regularly on social media. The principle of just putting yourself out there, you don't have to spend money on ads, but you do have to put yourself out there. And again, I think a lot of owners want there to be a version where that's not necessary. I don't see that as being a thing.
It could be with a long runway, like a long
Sure.
enough time, right? Like if you
Sure.
can be really slow and work
Yeah. Yeah.
your bar for every day
Yeah.
for a year and a half until you get an employee, and then because ultimately you get just enough critical mass of people telling each other or like telling people about it, but it takes a really long time, and
Yeah.
it's like if you like to, if you hit like the engine of an airplane,
Hmm.
if you ramp it up and you give it more fuel, it's
Hmm.
going to go faster, and so
Hmm.
you're going to accomplish the same goal much faster than if you just let it go really slow. If it's a very slow accelerating thing, it's like
Yeah.
sure you might get there eventually, but how much life could it have been improved if you
Yeah.
put with more intention behind it? And it's like
Yeah.
a thing that you've mentioned in consulting meetings before that I've been a part of.
Hmm.
It's like you don't get a prize for only doing organic marketing. You don't get a prize for only doing word of mouth. Like there's no
Yeah.
benefit to it other than that you didn't spend
Yeah.
direct money on it.
Yeah.
But it's like at the end of the day, if your margins are right,
Hmm.
every dollar you spend should bring in more dollars. So,
Hmm.
it's like
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
not to. I realize I just moved us on to our next topic, but uh, it's just like I don't know. You can do it
True.
slow and
Yeah.
difficult, or you can like put some effort behind it and go a little faster.
Yeah. I think the linchpin on that though is if you go that route, you have no options when things go wrong.
Totally. Yeah.
And will things ever go wrong?
It's been
Yes.
known to happen.
It's been known to happen. So like again the analogy of a relationship, if you magically got into a relationship through no effort energy, you just had a really long runway. What if that person breaks up with you? How are you going to get into another relationship
Yeah, totally.
if you never learned to put yourself out there? And I would still, even though I 100% agree with you, I would still almost say like, don't do that unless you're independently wealthy and the whole thing doesn't matter.
Totally. Yeah.
And you can like keep paying the rent
Yeah.
even when the next thing goes sideways, because when you have these things within your circle of influence and things start to get squirrely, you can do stuff. You can,
Yep.
the plane hits turbulence, you can climb to a higher altitude and you'll still be okay. And I think that's where people who accidentally got off the ground through no intentional effort, great, you got up there. But what if the wind changes? You
Totally.
don't know how you got there, so you don't
Yeah.
know how to stay there if something changes. And I think that's part of the reason why we want, healthy businesses, healthy coffee businesses that take great care of people. We want people thriving. We want people flourishing. Who flourishes more? People who are proactive and empowered, or people who are reactive and disempowered? It's going to be the people who feel empowered, who feel proactive, and that's why marketing, I would say, is a necessity, not just a nicety, because it's not about marketing. It's about you flourishing and thriving, your staff flourishing and thriving, more people finding out about the need you fill. I did not explore paid marketing, until I was super convinced that we could do an incredible job helping cafe and roastery owners. And that I think is where I'd like to go. Where I'd like to go next. I'd like to take a brief moment and thank another one of today's sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by our one-on-one coaching program. Whether you're in the startup process or you've already opened up your cafe and roastery, our one-on-one coaching program is for people who are ready for a personalized touch and a proven process to follow. This 12-month program takes you through 3 major phases where we make sure you as the owner are flourishing. We make sure the business is flourishing. And finally, we make sure the staff is flourishing. Not because staff is least important, but because this is the only process that actually works. When you join one-on-one coaching, you get access to all of our group coaching materials, including recordings and the private Slack community. In addition to that, you get a standing one-on-one meeting with us where we walk you through how to ensure that you are flourishing as the owner, how to ensure your business is flourishing, and of course, how to ensure your staff is flourishing. For one-on-one coaching, we prioritize people who have taken our courses and or joined our group coaching, but you can always reach out to us and schedule a strategy call so that we can be helpful and see if one-on-one coaching is a good fit for you. Just go to our website, threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com, and click the link to book a strategy call. There is no blue ribbon for not spending money on ads, and in many ways, organic marketing is more expensive than paid marketing efforts. But if we're going to spend money, what are things we should be looking for before we hire a social media manager or spend money on Instagram ads? What, from your experience, what do you alluded to it already? Every dollar should make you dollars back, but I see this as like a big kind of sinkhole for a lot of owners. They decide to finally spend some money, but they spend it and they're not paying attention, or they're not given parameters or benchmarks. And so they end up flushing it down the drain. And then they call me back and say, no, it doesn't work. And that breaks my heart, not because they think that doesn't work, but because they're flushing dollars down the drain doing things that are not super helpful with it.
Yeah.
What should people be looking for when they do finally decide to spend money on marketing?
Okay, so I'm gonna dial back a little bit here. I'm gonna do the thing that people are gonna be so tired of hearing about. But if you don't do the strategic work of knowing who your target customer is, and you don't understand what product you're offering and how you're going to do that, it leads to you doing things that are ineffective. And I'm going to specifically point out for an example here of, like, let's say your target customer is like 65, dual income, kids are retired, they have over $1 million in net worth or something, and you decide that you need to start marketing on TikTok. Right, because somebody said that that's what you should do. Right, that's not going to work. That's not going to work, because you're trying to like sell something to people that don't have any interest. Like, they can't possibly do that. Yeah. And I think that's what happens a lot of times with marketing, is that people they try to market to people that aren't there, aren't in that particular thing. So it's really important to pick the avenue of like where the people that you're trying to reach are. So if you're trying to reach, like one thing that I always recommend that people don't, I think a lot of particularly millennial business owners really miss the mark on, is our entire rejection of radio and print. I don't use those things at all. I haven't listened to the radio since like 2007, when I got a Zune that I could plug into my car. It's like, I haven't touched the radio since then. Lots of people still listen to the radio, and like, I haven't had a print newspaper in forever. Lots of people still read print newspapers. And I didn't learn this until it was on accident, when I had an article published in the local newspaper about us. And the next day we had like a bunch of people that I'm not naturally good at reaching, kind of the older, like, baby boomer crowd. They were like at our shop, like packed out, like, oh, this place is lovely, thanks so much. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I had no idea that would have that kind of an impact. So I think one of the things that's really important is understanding who you're trying to reach, where they're at, and then working with people who are good at reaching those people. In the same way that, like, if you're trying to reach, Gen Z or Gen Alpha folks, and like, you wouldn't go to someone who runs an old school newspaper, it's right. They just don't know how to speak to that language. You should probably find a young Gen Z marketing agency that's specifically built and targeted to do that thing, and try to work with them on that. Like, so I think that's one of the big things that could be really useful. Another thing is to, like, pick a number or a budget that you think, you want to spend. A quick and easy thing that I'll usually recommend is 5% of your revenue. And keep in mind, this is assuming that you have decent margins and your business is set up in a healthy way, because 5% can tank every dollar that you have if your margins are bad, right? And you haven't done the work to know your costing and all those sorts of things, which we're going to probably get in more later. But that's assuming you have, some buffer there. That's, something that you can put your operation expenses towards. It's just like, let's just pick 5%. Try to go with a specific target of people that we already know that we're good at reaching, and just get in front of more of them. So
I love that.
I think those are a couple of like really essential things.
Yeah. Somebody actually just asked me the other day what percent of revenue should go towards marketing. So I love that you mentioned 5%. And if you're not doing anything, and you want to like work yourself to 5%, like
start with 1.
Yeah, start with 1%.
Start with 2, whatever.
Yeah, and I think especially my exposure experience is mostly on Instagram, but as far as like paid advertisements. But I've heard quite a few people say versions of anything less than $100 is kind of not not enough for the algorithm to like work out. So that obviously that this kind of specific guidance is going to change from time to time. But
Yeah.
I do think that is a helpful, like, just remember, like, we're dealing with, when you're going that route, you're dealing with like minimum viable dollar amount. So
Totally.
just being aware, 5% of revenue, 1% to start, or like I would say, don't do it unless you can do $100. And as far as like social media marketing goes, there's one thing that I want to poke at before we leave off the topic for today. Well, one thing you said that I think is super, super powerful is you're describing marketing in a way that you let your target market lead the way. How are you going to do it? What are you going to do? Your explanation of your approach is very much like, let it be largely inspired by who it is you're trying to reach. I think that's really, really powerful. There's a philosophy though that I come across this a ton, and yet I still get tons of pushback when I tell people that every dollar you spend on marketing should get you dollars back, more dollars than you put in.
Mm-hmm.
And then I say somewhere around the tune of $5 back for every $1 you put in. And then everybody loses their mind when I say that. And I have a hard time explaining this because this is such a common recommendation. And I've tried different ways of reframing it. I've explained to people like $1 in, $5 out. That's like a 20% labor percentage.
Yeah.
That's not crazy.
Yeah.
But this is the one of the things I get a ton of pushback on, and variations of I've never heard that before, or you're the only person I've heard say that before. And part of me wants to say like, well, you just need to get out more, because everybody is saying like numbers like these when it comes to marketing, especially.
Yeah.
How
That's assuming you have a
20%
20% profit margin in the first place, right? Like when you really math that out, like if you're spending that, like that's a 20% margin of profit that most people are running at 10. So it's like, if you're running that, you really want to make sure you're dialed and you're getting your money back.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
But
sure.
anyway, it's fascinating to me whenever people are like, oh, that's the only time I've ever heard that. It's like, well, this is the only time you've hired a consultant, right? Right? Like,
Yeah.
is that shocking?
Yeah. Well, you've paid
Weird.
us money to tell you things you've never heard, and now that we've told you things you've never heard, you're upset.
Yeah. Fascinating.
That's true. Yeah. Well, yeah, a 5x ROI or a 5x return on your ad spend, ROAS, that's the same as pricing your mocha at 20% cost of goods sold.
Yeah.
It's the same as a 20% labor percentage. It
Yep.
means the mocha costs $1 to make and you charge $5. You make 5 times more than it cost you.
Yeah.
So I'll keep working on different ways to explain this to folks. But in the meantime, part of my hope in talking about this on this podcast is so that if you ever do join our small groups or hires for one-on-one coaching, it won't be the very first time you've heard.
Yeah.
You need to be setting yourself up so that you can put $1 in and get $5 back.
Yeah.
That presumes you're setting up something that's measurable. And I think this is the thing with paid marketing especially. Don't engineer a marketing campaign where you can't measure the return on your investment.
Yep.
I hear a lot of people say like, "Oh, we did a special and it was like a buy one get one free." Okay, but how are you going to measure the return on your ad spend for that buy one get one free?
Mm-hmm.
And determining beforehand how you're going to measure the results. I mean, we just talked in the last episode about SMART goals. I mean, just briefly, but SMART goals. S is for specific, M is for measurable. And again, people go off the rails here. I get tons of pushback on measurability. And to me, this is another one I have a hard time with, because you have 2 marketing campaigns. One is not measurable, we have no idea, and the other is very measurable, we know exactly what we got back. To me, it is self-evident that one is better than the other, but I have a really hard time explaining that to people who are like, well, we there's just no way you can track your return on investment. Fundamentally, wouldn't it be better if you could, though?
Yeah, that's one of those things where a phrase that I tell people a lot is you can't measure what you don't, or you can't manage what you don't measure. And people sometimes get pushback on that, and I've often heard people say something like, "Well, you can't measure quality or you can't measure taste." It's like, yes, you can. Like, you can absolutely do that. It's like I
Your
mean,
whole coffee
because
selection process. Yeah.
yeah, it's like you are a Q grader and all that sort of thing. So we understand that there are like ways of measuring and ways of calibrating and those sorts of things. But especially to somebody who doesn't have any experience with that at all, it feels really crazy.
Totally.
But it's like, no, you can actually do this. Like you can like that's the reason why UC Berkeley has a sensory analysis program. Because you can do that. You can measure and calibrate against like mass spectrum chromatography and with other panels of tasters, and you can have the same reference points and you can move forward from there. Like you can do that. It's possible. And so it's like, don't do anything that you can't measure. But there's probably a way to measure it. It's like you can't measure everything. You can't measure some things like love, et cetera. But you can also get a little closer to measuring things about love, like what's your affection towards somebody, like those kinds of things. And just because you can't measure everything doesn't mean you should measure nothing. Right. And I think that's where a lot of people get really lost in the sauce, is because like they don't like to measure things, largely because it creates a sense of accountability, of like, oh, this isn't working. But it's like, in the same way that it's not a smart idea to drive a vehicle that doesn't have a working speedometer too well. It's like you just don't know, and it's like, sure, you can rely on other cars next to you and try to like guess, but especially if you're like driving a truck that's fully loaded with like a super heavy trailer behind you or something, and you're going down hills, like it's really nice to be able to know your speed, because your vehicle can only respond within certain limits in a way different way than an average car would. So you just have to have that ability. So I would, if you can't measure it, don't do it, first and foremost. But then also have a good idea of being able to measure it, and being able to see the impact. Like if you're not checking your sales and you don't know what your normal P&L looks like and those sorts of things, you have no idea if it's effective or not. And then again, you're just throwing money away, and that's money that you could have been keeping or spending on a better espresso machine or giving your staff bonuses or whatever, right? Like any number of other things, rather than just throwing it away at something. So
I love that. And I think that analogy, I've used that analogy, the car without a dashboard. It is like a fully loaded truck, and specifically a truck fully loaded with people.
Yeah.
You asked me to get in a truck that you're driving, like a big old passenger van. And you're the driver, but you're like, well, but there's no dashboard on this thing. Like, we don't know how much fuel there is. We don't know what the speedometer, what our speed is. I'm not getting in that car with you. That's messed up to ask people to do that. I think one of the themes of this podcast in particular is I want us to create a space for coffee business owners, and also create a space where there's a little bit of tough love from time to time. And I think there's two things, tough love style. If you can't measure it, don't do it.
Yeah.
And or reverse engineer a way to measure it. But like, if you genuinely can't measure it, don't do it. It's anything you're doing that's not measurable is fundamentally flawed. So stop doing all that stuff, or modify it so you can measure it. And then tough love takeaway number 2 would be, get $5 back for every dollar you put in. And if you can't measure that, stop doing that. And one of the biggest things I see people spend money on without quantifying the return on investment is a social media manager. $500, $750, $1,000 a month, with zero expectations for any kind of return on investment. That one breaks my heart the most, because especially because there's a person in that seat on the airplane, so to speak. And so things get squirrely really fast, because we're not talking about marketing anymore. We're talking about so-and-so specifically. And so it sounds callous to say these things, because I'm mostly thinking about marketing as a general idea. Once there's a person in that seat, though, it's much more difficult.
Totally.
So if you don't have somebody in that seat, don't put somebody in that seat until you're certain they can return an investment. If there is somebody in that seat, try to
make sure they're qualified and competent.
Try to take a little bit of a dispassionate approach in terms of like, hey, my spouse is kind of doing the marketing. Okay. Would you let them kind of keep your books? Would you let them kind of file your taxes? Would you let them kind of do anything else? Hopefully not. And it's the same with marketing. Um, and so that mentality, though, of like, yeah, are they qualified? Are they competent to do these things?
I find a
Making
lot of
sure you,
times,
yeah,
people want to hire a social media manager from like their team,
yeah,
of people that they already have or something, and a lot of times they want to,
yeah,
like someone who's good at taking photos, for example, will end up
yeah, yeah.
getting a social media job. And it's like, these are actually fundamentally different. Like being a good photographer is not the same thing as being a good
Hmm.
social media manager. And it's like if you're going to try it, maybe just go talk to a social media management firm,
Hmm.
try it out for a little bit.
Hmm.
See, go to one with some good reviews that have proven
Yeah,
success and spend some
yeah,
money there first. And then once you've had a sense of what it's like to work with people who are achieving what needs to get achieved, maybe then you can look at bringing someone in
yeah,
house,
yeah.
right? Because then at least you have an idea of like what's possible and what's
Totally.
fair and
Yep.
reasonable. Um,
Totally.
so I don't know.
That's such a good word. Yeah, that's such a good perspective for a reason to kind of go the more professional route first on something, because then if you do decide to bring it in house, you know
Yeah.
what the standards are. And the fundamental difference between taking pictures and marketing, or even just more philosophically, like the fundamental difference between a piece of art and a piece of marketing collateral, they're just different things. And a lot of artists are sitting in the quote unquote marketing chair on the plane. But I think that that's an incredible disservice to everybody. And again, this would be maybe tough love piece number 3. Think about it for a second. If they were really good at social media marketing, they wouldn't work in your coffee shop. They would be working somewhere else doing social media marketing. So anytime somebody has like a side hustle that's social media marketing, I'm having been in the side hustle category. I get it, but I'm also like, be super extra careful, because if they were actually good at what they're doing, it probably wouldn't be a side hustle. They'd probably be their full time thing, either for themselves or for a social media like marketing firm or something like that. So make sure it's measurable. Expect a 5x return on your investment, and
Make
don't
sure it's
forget to
real
hire
too.
a professional. Yeah, make sure it's
Can I just take a
real.
brief moment to talk about the thing that happens that I see so many times with
Get it.
accounts? I will go, like, every once in a while I'll get reached out to by somebody and they're like, "Hey, like, how's it going? Like, nice to see your business or whatever." It's like,
You're
I
so
grow social
handsome.
media companies. No, Michael. I mean, that does happen.
You should
And
put on glasses.
that's not podcast material, Michael.
Oh my god.
Anyway, that's, you can ask me about that some other time if you're somebody listening to this. Anyway, the point of this is, I'll go see that and then I'll go check out their page and they've got like 25,000 followers and it's like interesting, and I'll like check their likes and they've got like 3,000, 2,000, etc. And then all of a sudden at one post like difference, they'll have like 4,000 likes, and then the next post they'll have like two, and then all of them below that are two, and then you go and check the people who liked their accounts, like those likes, and they're all bots, every single one of them.
Oh yeah, totally.
It's just like,
Totally.
dude, listen, the appearance of success is not the same thing as success.
Yeah.
And I would so much rather have fewer high engagement
Yeah.
people following what I'm doing who actually
Hmm.
are real and care
Hmm.
than the appearance of
Hmm.
a lot of people believing in what I'm doing and
Love it.
success, right? Like,
Love
to
it.
me, good social media marketing is not the numbers, it's the engagement, it's the like,
Hmm.
how
Hmm.
invested are people here,
Yeah.
and do they care about this thing in the
Hmm.
same way?
I love that.
So don't fall for those traps either. Don't fall for the, do you want to have 40,000 followers? It's like they just paid Russian bot farms to go like create a bunch of fake accounts that they all just like wrote a code for, and so they just made up all these accounts and then they just go and like all the same photos and follow the same accounts
Hmm.
that paid this other person or whatever, and it's like, and then nothing happened. You got no value out of that because those are all fake.
Yeah.
So anyway, please don't do that. That's all. Just a small pet peeve of, don't do that kind of stuff. That's
Yeah.
cringy and horrible.
Yeah.
So don't do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. It all goes back to an investment versus spending. We're
Hmm.
not we're not saying spend money.
Yeah.
We're saying invest it. Invest it in things that get you a great return. Marketing can be and should be one of those things. Just like a good espresso machine gets you a return. because higher quality products, because less downtime, because it breaks. All these things, these are all investments. This is why we can say, in broad brushstrokes, every dollar you put out there should get you dollars back, because every dollar should be an investment. And that's the characteristic of an investment. You expect it to return you additional dollars, more than what you put in.
Yeah.
How much more varies, depending on what you're talking about, but definitely more than you put in. And I think if people just adopted that mindset for marketing, forget the 5x return on investment, just a return on investment, I would be so happy if people just started expecting that. Just like you expect that from your real estate, just like you expect it from your investment portfolio, expect it from your marketing. It should be an investment that you get a return on a regular basis. Well, thanks so much, Maxwell, for diving into this topic. I love marketing. I used to hate it, and I think it was partially because my expectations were based on fiction, Don Draper-esque Mad Men type stuff, manipulation, or the big campaigns that I see for products that are
meaningless,
figuratively or literally killing people.
Yeah.
But just because that's the way it often gets used doesn't mean that's the way it has to be. And I think if the good people that are out there embraced some of these strategies, whether it's word of mouth, whether it's organic, non-paid efforts, or actually paid efforts, I think we would see a coffee industry that takes even better care of people, and a coffee industry that's more effectively positioned to influence culture at large if we engaged with some of these things in a more helpful, proactive, empowered way.
Yeah.
All right, man. Thanks for being here. I super appreciate your perspective on all these topics, but especially marketing. It's fun to hear your thoughts on this. Until next time, take care.
See y'all.
Thank you for joining me today for my discussion with Maxwell Mooney. Please check out the links in the show note captions to follow Maxwell Mooney on Instagram at Maxwell Threadbare. You can also check out the interview he did with Upflip that has millions of views. They interviewed him while he still owned Narrative. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on YouTube. That's a great zero-cost way to support this podcast. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple and Spotify. And on both Spotify and Apple, you can leave us up to a 5-star review. Please check out our online courses, our group coaching, and our one-on-one coaching. That's the absolute best way to support this podcast. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to cover, or guests you'd like us to invite, please leave those in the comments section on YouTube. If you're not already following us on social media, we are at Threadbare Coffee Consulting on Instagram, and that's really the only platform we're active on. That's where I regularly post bite-sized thoughts on what it will take you, the owner, to build a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including you. The content we post on Instagram overlaps with the podcast, but it's generally distinct from anything we cover on this podcast. If you haven't already visited our website, we have a myriad of free tools and trainings for coffee shop and coffee roastery owners. Everything from calculating your cost of goods sold for both a cafe and a roastery, which is completely different, pricing, which again for a cafe and roastery is completely different, managing labor percentage in a way that takes great care of people, etc., etc. All of those tools and trainings are available at our website, threadbarecoffeeconsulting.com. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. And last but not least, thank you for your interest in building a healthy coffee business that takes great care of people, including you.